The construction at the vacant lot had begun just over a week ago in the heart of Maple Creek, a modest town nestled in the rolling hills of Vermont. It was a small-scale project, a revitalization effort to transform the neglected space into a community square complete with walking paths, concrete benches, and a shared garden that would bring life back to the aging neighborhood. Mayor Eleanor Thompson had pushed for this project for years, claiming it would be the cornerstone of her community renewal initiative. The construction crew, led by foreman Jack Harlow, worked diligently each day, mixing cement, adjusting the foundation, and following the tight schedule imposed by the town council. The air was filled with the sounds of machinery and workers calling to one another as they transformed the once empty lot. Nothing indicated that this ordinary piece of land concealed anything more than soil and ancient roots. Nothing, that is, until one cloudy morning when Scout, a canine patrol dog from the local community safety program, disrupted the ordinary rhythm of the day with behavior that was initially dismissed as mere animal curiosity. Scout was a 5-year-old German shepherd with intelligent eyes and a disciplined demeanor, trained to detect narcotics and assist in finding missing persons. He had been brought to the construction site by Officer Ryan Mitchell, a volunteer with the Municipal Safety Department, who was taking his 4-legged partner for a brief walk during his break. It was a common routine for them, a chance for Scout to stretch his legs while Ryan checked on the progress of the town's newest improvement project. The mid-September air carried a hint of the coming fall, and most of the workers had their jackets zipped up against the morning chill. Jack was showing Ryan the blueprints for the finished square when Scout suddenly tensed. The dog had wandered near the deepest part of the excavation, where workers were still removing debris, when he stopped abruptly. His body went rigid, his focus locked on the ground, and he began to bark with an intensity that caught everyone's attention. Constant, almost desperate sounds that echoed across the site. One of the construction workers, Mike Daniels, laughed and called out, "Maybe he's caught the scent of a raccoon down there." Another worker, Tina Rodriguez, suggested that the animal had confused the smell of wet concrete with something else. The barking continued. It wouldn't stop. Scout, even, when pulled by his leash, returned to the same spot repeatedly. He dug frantically with his paws, stood on his hind legs, and barked with increasing urgency. Initially, no one paid much attention. Dogs often responded to instincts that humans couldn't comprehend. But Walter Green, a 72-year-old man who was walking on the other side of the street, stopped in his tracks. There was something about that bark that didn't seem like play or confusion. It sounded like purpose. Walter had worked with search and rescue dogs during his time as a park ranger in the Green Mountains. He recognized the pattern in Scout's behavior. This wasn't random. The elderly man crossed the street, approached Officer Mitchell, who was still struggling to calm Scout, and suggested with a firm voice that they investigate the spot. "That dog isn't playing around, son," Walter said, his weathered face serious beneath his worn baseball cap. "I've seen that behavior before. He's found something." Reluctantly, Officer Mitchell asked Jack if they could dig a little deeper, where Scout was indicating. Jack hesitated, concerned about delays to the already tight schedule, but Walter's steady gaze and Scout's unwavering focus convinced him. "All right, but let's make it quick," Jack conceded, motioning to 2 of his workers. "Mike, Tina, grab your shovels and check it out." The small crowd that had gathered watched as Mike and Tina began to dig carefully where Scout had been so fixated. The tension mounted as their shovels started to encounter resistance in the soil, something hard, something that wasn't concrete or a root. A silence fell over the site as they dug deeper, revealing a gray tarp covered with dirt and dried leaves. The tarp shifted slightly. Scout's barking ceased as if he had accomplished his mission. Beneath that makeshift protection lay a human body. It was an elderly man, visibly weakened, unconscious, with clear signs of dehydration and prolonged exposure to the elements. Jack immediately called out, "Someone call 911," while Tina quickly checked for a pulse. "He's alive, but very weak," she announced, her voice trembling slightly. Ryan was already on his radio, requesting emergency medical services, while Walter knelt beside the uncovered man, removing his own jacket to provide additional warmth. The construction crew stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they were seeing. No one could understand how the man had ended up there, how long he had been buried, or who might have done this to him. There were no signs of violence or evidence of foul play, and as they would soon discover, there was no crime at all. The ambulance arrived within minutes, sirens wailing as it pulled up to the construction site. Paramedics rushed to the scene with a stretcher and emergency equipment. The crowd of workers and gathering townspeople stepped back to give them room, watching in solemn silence as the elderly man was carefully lifted onto the stretcher. His skin was pale, his clothes dirty and damp, but the gentle rise and fall of his chest confirmed he was still holding on. As the paramedics prepared to transport him, a woman's panicked voice cut through the crowd. "That's him! That's my father!" The crowd parted as Catherine Winters, a local elementary school teacher, rushed forward with tears streaming down her face. "That's Robert Winters. He's been missing for 4 days." Catherine had been searching frantically for her father since he had failed to return from one of his morning walks earlier that week. Robert, a 78-year-old former mountaineer, suffered from occasional memory lapses, though he had insisted on maintaining his independence and his daily routines. The authorities had been helping the family search, but there had been no sign of him until now. Officer Mitchell gently held Catherine back as the paramedics continued their work, explaining that her father needed immediate medical attention. "They're taking him to Maple Creek General. You can follow them there," he explained, his hand steady on her shoulder. Catherine nodded, her eyes never leaving her father's still form as the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance. "How did he end up buried here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No one had an answer yet, but Scout sat alertly at Ryan's side, his mission accomplished. The day that had started as ordinary for everyone in Maple Creek had suddenly transformed into something extraordinary. As the ambulance pulled away, its sirens once again breaking the silence that had fallen over the construction site, Jack looked at his crew, at Officer Mitchell and Scout, and at the gathering townspeople. Something had changed in their small community, something none of them quite understood yet. The vacant lot, once just another construction project, had suddenly become the center of a mystery that would soon bring the entire town together in ways no one could have predicted. And Scout, the K-9 officer who had refused to be ignored, had just become the most important dog in Maple Creek. 4 days earlier, Robert Winters had risen with the sun, as he always did. Despite Catherine's concerns about his occasional memory lapses, the former mountaineer maintained strict routines that kept him grounded. Every morning at precisely 5:30 a.m., he would wake up, make a cup of black coffee, and sit on his porch to watch the sunrise over the Vermont hills. By 6:15, he would be on his way for his daily 3-mile walk through Maple Creek, a silver thermal blanket folded neatly in his jacket pocket, a habit held over from his mountaineering days when he'd learned that preparation often meant the difference between life and distress. "Always be ready for the unexpected," he would tell Catherine whenever she questioned why a man walking through a small town needed emergency gear. "Nature doesn't care about your plans." That Monday morning had begun like any other, except for the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The local weather report had mentioned possible thunderstorms later in the afternoon, but Robert wasn't concerned. He'd be home long before then. He left the house he shared with Catherine and her husband, James waving to Mrs. Patterson, who was collecting her newspaper next door. The retired English teacher smiled and called out, "Looks like rain coming, Robert. Don't stay out too long." Robert had just nodded and continued on his way, his pace steady and purposeful, despite his advancing years. He followed his usual route, past the elementary school where Catherine taught 3rd grade, down Main Street where shopkeepers were just beginning to raise their shutters, and toward the eastern edge of town where development gave way to more natural surroundings. It was near this border between the town and the surrounding countryside that the vacant lot sat waiting for its transformation. Robert had watched with interest over the past few months as town meetings discussed the revitalization project. He'd even spoken up once or twice, suggesting native plant species for the community garden based on his decades of experience in the mountains. The vacant lot had long been an eyesore, a forgotten space overgrown with weeds and occasionally used as an impromptu dumping ground by less conscientious citizens. The construction company had arrived the previous week, clearing the land and beginning preliminary excavation work. As Robert approached the site that Monday morning, he noticed that the workers hadn't arrived yet. It was still too early. Curious about the progress, he decided to take a closer look. The chain-link fence surrounding the construction site had a gap where a delivery truck had damaged it the day before. Robert, still spry despite his age, slipped through to examine the work more closely. The site was quiet, the machinery silent sentinels in the early morning light. He walked carefully around the perimeter of the excavation, noting the depth of the foundation work and mentally comparing it to the plans he'd seen presented at the town meeting. Lost in his assessment, Robert didn't notice when the first raindrops began to fall, much earlier than forecasted. The storm had accelerated, moving in faster than meteorologists had predicted. Within minutes, the gentle sprinkle transformed into a downpour, and Robert turned to leave, suddenly aware of how quickly the weather had changed. That's when it happened. A flash of lightning illuminated the site, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground. Robert, startled by the sudden noise, took a step backward. His foot caught on a piece of exposed rebar, and he lost his balance. Time seemed to slow as he fell backward toward the deepest part of the excavation. His head struck something hard on the way down, and darkness enveloped him before he even hit the bottom of the pit. The storm intensified, becoming one of the most severe downpours Maple Creek had experienced in years. Water rushed across the construction site, carrying loose soil and debris with it. By the time the rain stopped 2 hours later, the pit where Robert lay unconscious had partially filled with mud and runoff, covering his motionless form. Only his survival instincts, deeply ingrained from years in the wilderness, had prompted him to pull out his thermal blanket as he began to regain consciousness briefly, before slipping away again into the darkness. Back at home, Catherine had begun to worry when her father didn't return by 8 a.m., his usual time. By night, she was calling neighbors. By noon, she had contacted the Maple Creek Police Department to report him missing. "He's very punctual. Officer Bennett," she explained to the desk sergeant who took her report. "He's never late without calling. Something must have happened." Sergeant Alicia Bennett took the report seriously, especially given Robert's age and his occasional memory issues. "We'll send out a patrol right away, Mrs. Winters. Does your father have any favorite spots he likes to visit? Any friends he might have stopped to see?" Catherine provided all the information she could, including Robert's usual walking route, while her husband James organized neighbors into search parties. The next 4 days became a blur of activity for the Winters family and, for much of Maple Creek, missing person flyers with Robert's smiling face appeared on telephone poles and in shop windows throughout town. Volunteers combed the streets, woods, and fields surrounding Maple Creek. The local radio station, WMCK, broadcast regular updates and appeals for information. Mayor Thompson authorized emergency resources for the search, including police overtime, and the use of the town's emergency management drone for aerial reconnaissance. The construction at the vacant lot continued, the workers unaware that just feet below where they were pouring concrete for what would become a pathway, an elderly man lay trapped and unconscious. Catherine visited the site on the second day of the search, standing at the fence with a flyer in her hand as she spoke to Jack Harlow. "My father walks by here every morning," she told the foreman, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. "He was very interested in this project. Did any of your crew see him on Monday?" Jack had shaken his head sympathetically. "Sorry, ma'am. We didn't arrive until 7:30, and it was pouring rain by then. We barely got any work done that day because of the storm." He took the flyer from her, promising to show it to his workers and keep an eye out. What no one realized was that the storm had not only trapped Robert, but had also covered any signs of his presence. The rushing water had washed away his footprints, and the mud and debris had hidden him from view. The excavation work had continued around and above him, the noise of machinery drowning out any faint sounds he might have made during brief moments of consciousness. By the 4th day, hope was beginning to fade among the searchers. The police had expanded their efforts to neighboring towns, thinking Robert might have become confused and wandered farther than usual. They'd checked hospitals, shelters, and even begun to drag the small lake on the western edge of town, a possibility Catherine couldn't bear to consider. That morning, as Officer Ryan Mitchell decided to walk Scout past the construction site during his break, Catherine was sitting in her living room surrounded by friends and family who had come to offer support. She clutched her father's old mountaineering photo album, finding comfort in images of a younger Robert standing triumphantly on various summits, his face weathered but always smiling. "He's a survivor," she told her friend Lisa, who had brought over a casserole that no one had the appetite to eat. "If anyone can make it through whatever's happened, it's my dad." Lisa squeezed her hand. "The whole town is looking for him, Kath. We'll find him." Outside, the sky had grown cloudy again, threatening another storm. The search teams were still out, though their numbers had dwindled as people returned to work and daily responsibilities. The initial surge of community support had begun to settle into a grim routine of diminishing hope. No one suspected that the mystery of Robert Winter's disappearance was about to be solved by a German shepherd with an exceptional sense of smell and a stubborn refusal to be ignored. At the construction site, Scout was about to change everything for the Winters family and for the entire town of Maple Creek. The connection between a missing elder with a rich past of adventure and survival and a trained K-9 officer doing his daily rounds was about to create a story that would transform their community forever. And as Catherine stared out her window at the gathering clouds, she had no idea that miles away, her father was about to be discovered, still clinging to life beneath layers of soil and debris, protected only by his decades of experience and an unwavering will to survive that had carried him through mountain blizzards and now might just bring him home from the darkness beneath the future community square of Maple Creek. The moment Scout's barking turned into a determined frenzy at the construction site, something shifted in Maple Creek. Time seemed to slow and accelerate simultaneously as the workers carefully excavated around the thermal blanket, revealing more and more of Robert's buried form. The paramedics worked with swift precision once they arrived, their faces etched with concentration as they assessed his condition. "BP is 90/60, pulse weak but steady," called out Emma Ramirez, the lead paramedic, her hands moving expertly as she inserted an IV line. "Severe dehydration, possible hypothermia despite the blanket, and likely a concussion." Her partner, Derek Watson, carefully fitted an oxygen mask over Robert's face while stabilizing his neck, uncertain what injuries might be hidden beneath the surface. "Sir, can you hear me?" Emma asked, leaning close to Robert's ear. "Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, Robert's dirt-encrusted fingers twitched against Emma's palm. A collective sigh of relief swept through the gathered crowd. "He's responsive," Emma announced, her professional demeanor momentarily cracking into a smile. "Let's get him to Maple Creek General, stat." As they lifted the stretcher into the ambulance, Catherine stood frozen, her hand pressed against her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Her husband James had his arm around her shoulders, supporting her as they watched Robert being loaded into the vehicle. "I'll drive you to the hospital," James whispered, gently guiding her toward their car. The ambulance pulled away, sirens, wailing a song of urgency and hope through the streets of Maple Creek. In its wake, the construction site hummed with shocked conversations and speculation. Jack Harlow stood looking at the pit where Robert had been found, his face pale. "We've been working right on top of him," he said, his voice hollow. "My guys were pouring concrete not 10 feet away yesterday." Officer Mitchell nodded grimly, one hand absently stroking Scout's head. The dog remained alert, as if still on duty, his eyes fixed on the spot where he'd made his discovery. "Don't blame yourself, Jack, nobody could have known." Walter Green, the elderly former ranger who had recognized Scout's behavior, stepped closer to the edge of the excavation. "The storm Monday morning must have washed a lot of soil down into this pit," he observed. "And if he was unconscious, he wouldn't have been able to call for help." He looked at Scout with newfound respect. "That dog of yours is something special, officer." He picked up a scent that was buried under feet of soil and debris. Ryan Mitchell nodded, pride evident in his expression as he gazed down at his partner. "Scout's been with the department for 3 years now. Best nose in the county, but I've never seen him react like that before. It was like he was possessed." Walter smiled knowingly. "Dogs have abilities we can't begin to understand. I worked with search and rescue teams in the mountains for 30 years. And I've seen dogs find survivors buried under avalanches when no human technology could detect them. He knelt down, his knees cracking in protest, and offered his hand to Scout, who sniffed it politely. "You're a hero, boy, a genuine hero." News of the remarkable rescue spread through Maple Creek at lightning speed. By the time Catherine and James arrived at the hospital, the emergency room waiting area was already filling, with concerned citizens, friends, and neighbors. Mayor Eleanor Thompson herself arrived minutes later, her usual composed demeanor replaced by genuine concern. "Catherine, James," she said, embracing them both, "I came as soon as I heard. This is absolutely extraordinary." Dr. Samantha Chen, the emergency room physician, emerged from the treatment area to speak with the family. Her face was serious but not grim as she approached Catherine. "Mrs. Winters, your father is stable but in serious condition," she explained, her voice calm and professional. "He's suffering from severe dehydration, exposure, and a concussion. We're warming him up, getting fluids into him and monitoring for any signs of internal injuries or complications. Will he—" Catherine couldn't finish the sentence, her voice catching. Dr. Chen's expression softened. "Your father is showing remarkable resilience, especially considering his age and the circumstances. The next 24 hours will be critical, but I'm cautiously optimistic. He's a fighter." Catherine nodded, tears welling in her eyes again. "Yes, he is. He always has been." Dr. Chen continued, "We're moving him to the ICU for close monitoring. Once he's settled, you can see him briefly." As the doctor returned to her patient, Catherine turned to James, disbelief and hope warring in her expression. "4 days, James. He was buried alive for 4 days." James pulled her close. "If anyone could survive that, it's your dad. Remember when he told us about getting stranded on Mount Washington for 3 days in a blizzard? He's tough as nails." Mayor Thompson, who had been listening nearby, stepped closer. "Catherine, I know this isn't the time, but I want you to know that the town will cover all of Robert's medical expenses, and once he's recovered, we'd like to honor him and the remarkable dog that found him." Catherine managed a small smile through her tears. "Scout. The dog's name is Scout." Back at the construction site, work had been halted for the day as police documented the scene, more out of procedure than suspicion of wrongdoing. Officer Mitchell had returned to the station with Scout, where the K9 officer was treated to unusual attention. The police chief, Diego Ramirez, had even ordered a special steak dinner delivered for the heroic dog. "You've done the department proud today, Mitchell," Chief Ramirez said, watching as Scout devoured his reward. "Both of you have. This could have had a very different outcome." Ryan nodded, still processing the events of the morning. "It was all Scout, Chief. I was just holding the leash." Chief Ramirez smiled. "Don't sell yourself short. You listened to your partner when others might have dismissed it as nothing. That's good police work." He paused, considering something. "You know, we've been trying to secure funding for an expanded K9 program. After today's rescue, I think the town council might be more receptive to the idea." Word of Scout's heroism continued to spread throughout the afternoon. The local newspaper, the Maple Creek Gazette, sent reporter Olivia Chen, Dr. Chen's younger sister, to interview Officer Mitchell and photograph Scout. Local television stations from Burlington dispatched news crews. By evening, the story had been picked up by national news networks, fascinated by the tale of a dog who had detected life beneath layers of soil and debris. At Maple Creek General Hospital, Robert Winters lay in the ICU, machines monitoring his vital signs as fluids and antibiotics flowed into his veins. Catherine sat by his bedside, holding his hand, speaking softly about everything that had happened since his disappearance. Whether he could hear her or not, she felt compelled to fill the silence, to anchor him to the world of the living with her words. "The whole town has been looking for you, Dad," she told him, gently stroking his weathered hand. "And you won't believe who found you. A police dog named Scout. He wouldn't stop barking until they dug where he was pointing." She smiled through fresh tears. "Sounds like someone else I know who doesn't give up easily." James brought her coffee and sandwiches, which she barely touched. Dr. Chen checked in regularly, noting improvements in Robert's vital signs with each visit. "His body is responding well to treatment," she assured Catherine. "His temperature is normalizing and his kidney function looks better than I would have expected given the circumstances." As night fell over Maple Creek, the hospital corridor outside Robert's room filled with a quiet stream of visitors bringing flowers, cards, and well wishes. Pastor Michael Williams from the Maple Creek Community Church organized an impromptu prayer circle in the hospital garden. Even those who weren't particularly religious joined hands in the cool evening air, finding comfort in community and shared hope. In the police station, Scout slept soundly in his kennel, exhausted from the day's events and unaware of his newfound celebrity. Officer Mitchell sat at his desk, fielding calls from media outlets and politely declining interview requests until morning. "Let the dog rest," he told a persistent reporter from a national morning show. "He's earned it." The construction site stood quiet under the security lights, the excavation now cordoned off with police tape. Jack Harlow had spent the afternoon reorganizing his schedule, determined that the delay wouldn't impact the overall completion date for Maple Creek Square. "We'll make up the time," he'd told Mayor Thompson firmly. "Some things are more important than deadlines." As midnight approached, Catherine finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep in the chair beside her father's bed, her head resting near his shoulder. In the dimly lit room, machines beeped softly, marking the rhythm of Robert's heart, the ebb and flow of his breathing. And then, as the digital clock on the wall ticked over to a new day, Robert Winter's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, he stared at the ceiling, confusion evident in his gaze. Slowly, he became aware of the oxygen mask on his face, the IV in his arm, the weight of his daughter's head against his shoulder. With tremendous effort, he lifted his free hand and gently placed it on Catherine's hair. The slight movement was enough to wake her. Catherine raised her head, blinking sleep from her eyes, and found herself looking into her father's open gaze. "Dad?" she whispered, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. Robert's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the closest he could come to a smile beneath the oxygen mask. He squeezed her hand weakly but deliberately. Catherine reached for the call button, pressing it repeatedly. "He's awake," she called out as a nurse hurried into the room. "My father's awake." As medical staff quickly gathered to assess their now conscious patient, Catherine stepped back, her heart overflowing. Outside the window of the ICU, the clouds that had hung over Maple Creek for days finally parted, revealing a sky full of stars, countless points of light shining in the darkness. Much like the hope that now illuminated the small Vermont town, where an ordinary dog had done something extraordinary, and where a community was about to discover just how deeply connected they truly were. The morning after Robert Winters opened, his eyes brought a renewed sense of hope to Maple Creek General Hospital. Dr. Chen arrived early, reviewing the night's medical reports with evident satisfaction. His vital signs continued to improve overnight, she told Catherine and James, who had barely left Robert's side. "We've removed the oxygen mask and switched to a nasal cannula. His kidney function is remarkably good considering the dehydration he experienced." Catherine, exhausted but elated, squeezed James's hand. "When will he be able to talk to us?" Dr. Chen smiled. "He's still very weak, but he's been responding to simple questions with nods and hand squeezes. The neurologist will evaluate him this morning to assess the concussion, but I think you'll be able to have a real conversation soon. Just keep it brief when it happens. He needs to conserve his energy." As the doctor left, Catherine turned to her husband. "I should call everyone, let them know he's awake." James nodded. "I'll stay with him. Take your time." The hospital waiting room had become an impromptu community center overnight. Teachers from Catherine's school, Robert's friends from the senior center, and neighbors who had participated in the search filled the space, sharing coffee from a large urn donated by Maple Creek Diner. Mayor Thompson had arranged for breakfast pastries to be delivered, and the atmosphere was one of cautious celebration. When Catherine emerged from the ICU to share the news of her father's continued improvement, a cheer rose from the gathered crowd. "He's still not talking much," she explained, "but the doctor says he's doing better than expected." Lisa Anderson, Catherine's closest friend and fellow teacher, wrapped her in a tight hug. "Your dad is the toughest man I know," she whispered. If anyone could survive being buried alive for 4 days, it's Robert Winters. Catherine nodded against her friend's shoulder. I keep thinking about how many times we walked right past him during the search. How many people must have been within feet of where he was trapped, never knowing. Lisa pulled back, her hands on Catherine's shoulders. But he was found. That's what matters now. Across town at the police station, Officer Mitchell arrived for his shift to find Scout's kennel surrounded by gifts. Dog treats, toys, and even a handmade banner reading Hero in bright letters created by the children from Maple Creek Elementary School. Chief Ramirez stood in the doorway of his office, an amused expression on his face. "Your partner's gotten more fan mail than Santa Claus," he commented as Ryan surveyed the scene. Scout, for his part, seemed unaffected by his newfound fame, sitting at attention and waiting for his handler's commands as usual. Ryan knelt to scratch behind the German Shepherd's ears. "What do you think of all this attention, boy? Pretty crazy, huh?" Scout's tail wagged once, his intelligent eyes fixed on Ryan's face. The local news vans remained parked outside the station, reporters hoping for interviews with the heroic dog and his handler. Ryan had agreed to speak with them after his morning briefing, recognizing the positive publicity this would bring to the department's K9 program. "Just remember to mention that Scout is one of many working dogs serving communities across the country," Chief Ramirez reminded him. "We want to highlight the importance of K9 units, not just celebrate one extraordinary event." By mid-morning, Robert had progressed enough to have the neurologist's evaluation. Dr. Marcus Williams conducted a series of tests, asking Robert to follow his finger with his eyes, checking his reflexes, and assessing his responses to simple questions. "Mr. Winters, do you know where you are?" he asked, his voice clear and professional. Robert's voice was barely audible, raspy from days without water, but his reply was clear. "Hospital." Dr. Williams nodded encouragingly. "That's right. Do you remember what happened to you?" Robert's brow furrowed in concentration. After a long moment, he whispered, "Fell. Storm." The neurologist made notes on his tablet. "Very good. Do you know what day it is today?" At this, Robert hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "That's perfectly normal after what you've experienced," Dr. Williams assured him. "You've been unconscious for several days." He completed his examination, then stepped outside to speak with Catherine and James. "Considering the circumstances, your father is doing remarkably well," he explained. "The concussion appears moderate rather than severe. He's showing good recall of events prior to his injury, which is an excellent sign. His confusion about time is expected and should resolve as he continues to recover." Catherine exhaled in relief. "So there's no permanent damage?" Dr. Williams smiled reassuringly. "Based on what I'm seeing, I expect a good recovery. Of course, at his age, it may take longer than it would for a younger patient, but your father appears to have the constitution of someone much younger." When they returned to Robert's room, they found him more alert, his eyes tracking their movement as they entered. Catherine took her place beside him, taking his hand gently. "Dad, the doctor says you're doing really well." Robert nodded slightly, then whispered, "Water?" James quickly poured a small amount into a cup, adding a straw, and helped Robert take a few sips. After wetting his parched lips, Robert looked directly at Catherine. "How found me?" Catherine smiled, tears welling in her eyes again. "It was a miracle, Dad. A police dog named Scout. He was walking by the construction site with his handler and just wouldn't stop barking at this one spot. They finally dug where he was indicating, and there you were." Robert's eyes widened slightly. "The Square Project?" Catherine nodded. "Yes, that's where you were. We think you must have fallen into the excavation during that big storm on Monday morning. Do you remember being there?" Robert's face contorted with the effort of remembering. Checking, progress, then rain, lightning. He paused, gathering strength, slipped, hit head. The pieces were finally coming together. Catherine squeezed his hand encouragingly. "The police think the storm washed soil down into the pit where you fell. You were partially buried, and then the construction continued, not knowing you were there." Robert nodded weakly. "Used blanket." Catherine smiled through her tears. Your thermal blanket. Dad, the doctors say that probably saved your life, along with the air pocket it created. All those years of you carrying that thing on your walks finally paid off. Robert's lips curved in the faintest smile. Always be prepared. As morning turned to afternoon, Robert drifted in and out of sleep, his body working hard to recover from its ordeal. Catherine and James took turns sitting with him, fielding a steady stream of text messages from friends and neighbors asking for updates. Outside the hospital, the construction crew from Maple Creek Square had gathered during their lunch break, standing in respectful silence in the parking lot, their hard hats held against their chests. Jack Harlow had brought them all, wanting to show support for the man they'd unknowingly worked above for days. Mayor Thompson, seeing the gathering from her office window across the street, walked over to join them. "Mr. Harlow," she greeted the foreman. "This is a thoughtful gesture." Jack nodded, his expression solemn. "We needed to be here, Mayor. My guys are pretty shaken up about the whole thing. Could have been any one of us that found him if we'd just looked a little deeper." The mayor placed a hand on his shoulder. "You couldn't have known. The important thing is that he was found in time." She looked up at the hospital windows. "And now we need to focus on making sure something like this never happens again." By late afternoon, Robert had regained enough strength to sit up slightly, in bed, and have a more extended conversation. Catherine had brought old family photos to help orient him, and they were looking through them together when a nurse appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Winters, there's someone here who would like to see your father if he's feeling up to it." Catherine looked up, curious. "Who is it?" The nurse smiled. "Officer Mitchell and his partner Scout. They wanted to check on Mr. Winters' condition." Catherine glanced at her father, who had perked up at the mention of the dog who had saved him. "Dad, would you like to meet Scout?" Robert nodded, more energetically than he had moved all day. "Yes, please." The nurse stepped out, returning moments later with Officer Mitchell in his uniform and Scout on a leash beside him. The German Shepherd was impeccably behaved, walking calmly despite the unfamiliar hospital environment. Ryan paused at the threshold, removing his cap. "Mr. Winters, it's an honor to meet you. I'm Officer Ryan Mitchell, and this is Scout." Robert's eyes were fixed on the dog, wonder evident in his gaze. "Come," he whispered, extending a trembling hand. Ryan looked to Catherine for permission. When she nodded, he led Scout closer to the bed, keeping him under perfect control. "Scout, gentle," he commanded softly. The German Shepherd approached the bed carefully, his intelligent eyes focused on Robert. With remarkable gentleness, he extended his muzzle toward the elderly man's outstretched hand, sniffing delicately before giving it a soft lick. Robert's face transformed, a genuine smile spreading across his features for the first time since his rescue. "Good dog," he whispered, his voice stronger than it had been all day. "Thank you." Ryan Mitchell cleared his throat, emotion evident despite his professional demeanor. "Scout has been specially trained to detect human scent, even in the most challenging conditions. But what he did yesterday, that was beyond training. It was something special." Catherine, watching the interaction between her father and the dog who had saved his life, felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. "How can we ever thank you both?" she asked, her voice catching. Officer Mitchell shook his head. "No thanks necessary, ma'am. This is why we do what we do. Scout was just doing his job." But everyone in the room knew it had been more than that. Something extraordinary had occurred at Maple Creek Square, something that defied simple explanation. A Scout sat proudly beside his handler, his tail gently sweeping the hospital floor. Robert Winters reached out again, this time scratching behind the dog's ear with increasing steadiness in his hand. "Smart boy," he murmured. "Heard me somehow." And though no one could explain exactly how Scout had detected a life buried beneath layers of soil and construction materials, the connection between the elderly adventurer and the dedicated K-9 officer was undeniable, a bond forged in one remarkable moment that had changed not only their lives but the entire fabric of Maple Creek itself. As evening approached once more, Robert's room filled with flowers, cards, and gifts from well-wishers throughout the community. Dr. Chen had pronounced herself cautiously amazed at his progress, and there was talk of moving him from the ICU to a regular room the following day if his improvement continued. Catherine, finally persuaded to go home for a proper night's rest, stood in the doorway looking back at her father. He was sleeping peacefully now, his color better, his breathing steady and strong. The nightmare of his disappearance was ending, replaced by a story of survival and connection that none of them would ever forget. 2 weeks after his remarkable rescue, Robert Winters sat in a wheelchair at the edge of what was now officially called Scouts Square, watching as Mayor Thompson cut the ceremonial ribbon. The construction had been completed ahead of schedule, with Jack Harlow's crew working extra hours to make up for the time lost during the rescue and investigation. The square was everything the town had hoped for: a beautiful community space with walking paths, benches, flower beds already planted with fall chrysanthemums, and a central area designated for the community garden that would be developed in spring. But the focal point of the new square, the element that hadn't been in the original plans, was a bronze statue of a German shepherd standing at alert, his ears perked forward as if listening for something only he could hear. The plaque at the base read simply, "Scout who heard what others could not, October 2025. The dedication ceremony had drawn the largest crowd Maple Creek had seen in decades. Residents filled every available space around the square, many holding their own dogs on leashes, others carrying handmade signs celebrating Scout and the Maple Creek K9 unit. Local businesses had closed for the afternoon to allow employees to attend, and the elementary school had brought all its students on a field trip to witness the historic moment. Robert, still recovering but gaining strength each day, was the guest of honor, seated beside Officer Mitchell and Scout. Catherine stood behind her father's wheelchair, one hand resting protectively on his shoulder. The improvements in his condition over the past 2 weeks had amazed his doctors. Dr. Chen had attributed his remarkable recovery to his lifetime of physical fitness, his inherent toughness, and what she called the healing power of community support. "Citizens of Maple Creek," Mayor Thompson began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "we gather today not just to open a new public space, but to celebrate something far more significant: the extraordinary connection between humans and animals, and the powerful bonds of community that have been strengthened through adversity." She gestured toward Robert and Scout. 2 weeks ago, a man's life hung in the balance, hidden from human detection. But one remarkable dog refused to be ignored, insisted on being heard, and in doing so taught us all about persistence, compassion, and the profound ways we can care for one another. The mayor turned to Robert. "Mr. Winters, your survival is nothing short of miraculous. Your strength and resilience are an inspiration to us all." Robert nodded, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. Though still thinner than before his ordeal, color had returned to his face, and the spark of determination that had carried him through countless mountain expeditions once again animated his features. When it was his turn to speak, Officer Mitchell stepped forward, Scout sitting obediently at his side. "I can't explain exactly what happened that day," he admitted, looking out at the assembled crowd. "Scout's training is extensive, but what he did went beyond anything we practice or prepare. For some might call it instinct, others might use the word miracle. Whatever it was, I'm just grateful that Scout and I were in the right place at the right time, and that I had the good sense to listen when my partner was trying to tell me something important." He looked down at the German shepherd with evident pride. "Scout has received commendations from the governor, the state police, and even national K9 organizations. But I know he doesn't care about medals or recognition. For him, it was simply about doing the job he was born to do, helping people." The audience applauded enthusiastically as Scout maintained his dignified posture, seemingly unaffected by the attention. Then it was Robert's turn. Catherine helped adjust the microphone to his level as he prepared to address the crowd. His voice, though still not at full strength, carried clearly in the autumn air. "I've stood on the summits of mountains," he began, "faced blizzards and ice storms, and navigated wilderness where no trails exist. But nothing in my life has taught me more about survival and connection than the 4 days I spent beneath this very ground, and the remarkable dog who found me when all seemed lost." He paused, gathering his thoughts. People have asked me what I remember from those days in darkness. The truth is, not much. Fragments of consciousness, moments of knowing I needed to conserve warmth, to breathe slowly, to hold on. His weathered hand reached out to rest on Scout's head, who had approached the wheelchair as if sensing he was being discussed. But I do remember one thing clearly. Before I was found, during what must have been Scout's discovery, I heard barking. In my state, I couldn't respond, couldn't move, but I heard it. And somehow I knew it meant I wasn't alone anymore. Robert's eyes glistened with emotion. That dog's voice was the sound of hope returning. I will never forget it as long as I live. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd began to disperse, many lingered to explore the new square, to have their photos taken with Scout and Officer Mitchell, or to speak with Robert and Catherine. The atmosphere was festive, with local vendors setting up booths selling food and drinks, musicians playing acoustic guitars in one corner, and children running along the newly paved paths. Walter Green, the former ranger who had recognized Scout's behavior during the rescue, approached Robert's wheelchair. "Glad to see you looking so well, Robert," he said, extending his hand. "I've been meaning to ask. I heard you were an experienced mountaineer. Whereabouts did you climb?" Robert's face lit up at the question. "All over. Started in the Whites up in New Hampshire, then the Adirondacks. Made it out to the Rockies a dozen times, the Sierra Nevada." He paused, a distant look in his eyes. "Even did Denali once back in '78. Walter whistled appreciatively. "Impressive. I spent 30 years in the Green Mountains myself, search and rescue mostly. Never had the guts for the big peaks." The two men fell into easy conversation, comparing experiences and sharing stories of wilderness adventures. Catherine, seeing her father engaged and animated, stepped away to give them space, finding herself beside Officer Mitchell, who was finally giving Scout a break from his formal duties. "He's really something special," she said, watching as Scout accepted gentle petting from a group of children under Ryan's watchful eye. "More than just a working dog," Ryan nodded. "The department has had offers from all over the country to use Scout for breeding programs. They want his genetics, his instincts. Chief Ramirez is considering it, but wants to make sure it doesn't interfere with Scout's primary work here." He smiled. "Though after all this attention, I'm not sure how we'll ever go back to routine patrols." Catherine looked around at the transformed square, at the community gathered in celebration, at her father deep in conversation with his new friend. "I don't think anything in Maple Creek will ever be quite routine again," she observed. "Something has changed here. People look at each other differently now. They pay attention." The unexpected outcome of Robert's ordeal and Scout's heroism had indeed been a subtle but profound shift in how the residents of Maple Creek related to one another. The search for Robert had initially brought people together in crisis, but his rescue had created something more lasting, a renewed awareness of community interdependence and the importance of truly seeing and hearing one another. In the weeks following the rescue, neighbors had started checking on elderly residents more frequently. The town council had established a new emergency response protocol specifically for missing persons. The local schools had instituted a Scouts Watch program, teaching children the importance of speaking up when something didn't seem right, of persisting when adults might not immediately listen. The construction company had implemented new safety procedures for all their projects, including daily thermal imaging scans of excavation sites before work began each morning. Even the local animal shelter had seen an increase in adoptions, particularly of older dogs, who might otherwise have been overlooked. As the afternoon stretched into evening, lights came on around Scout Square, illuminating the pathways and the central statue that would stand as a permanent reminder of an extraordinary moment in the town's history. Families spread blankets on the grass for an impromptu picnic. Someone brought out a guitar, and soon music filled the air. Robert, despite his still recovering condition, refused to leave, insisting on staying to soak in every moment of the celebration. "Dad, don't you think you should rest?" Catherine asked, concerned about his stamina. Robert shook his head, his eyes twinkling. "I spent 4 days in darkness, Kathy. I don't intend to miss a minute of light and life now that I've been given a second chance." He gestured to the scene around them. "Look at this. Look at what's happened here because of one dog's determination. Catherine followed his gaze, seeing the community transformed. Not just the physical space, but the connections between people, the attention they now paid to one another, the way they listened more carefully, observed more thoughtfully. Scout, now lying contentedly at Officer Mitchell's feet as children took turns offering him treats approved by his handler, seemed oblivious to his impact. For him, it had been simply a matter of doing what he was trained to do, detecting what humans could not sense and insisting on being heard until someone finally listened. As darkness fell completely and stars appeared above Scout Square, Robert Winters looked up at the night sky, then at the dog who had saved him, and finally at the community that had been forever changed by one remarkable connection between human and animal. Sometimes, he said softly to Catherine, the most important things in life are the ones we can't see directly, like the care we have for each other, the bonds that hold us together, the instincts that guide us. He reached for her hand, and sometimes it takes a dog to remind us of our humanity. In the months and years that followed, Maple Creek would continue to celebrate the anniversary of Robert's rescue and Scout's heroism. The canine officer would go on to train a new generation of police dogs, passing on not just his skills, but something of his extraordinary intuition and determination. Robert, fully recovered, would become a regular visitor to elementary school classrooms, telling children about his experience and the importance of preparedness, persistence, and community. And Scouts Square would remain the heart of Maple Creek, a place where people gathered not just for events and celebrations, but for everyday moments of connection, walking their dogs, meeting friends, watching their children play, and remembering that sometimes the most profound acts of heroism come from simply refusing to be silent when something important needs to be heard. For in the end, the story of Scout and Robert Winters wasn't just about a miraculous rescue or an extraordinary dog. It was about a community discovering its own capacity for attention and care, about the countless invisible threads that connect humans to animals and to each other, and about the quiet heroism of persistence in the face of overwhelming odds. It was, as Robert often said when concluding his school presentations, about listening carefully to those who see what we cannot see and hear what we cannot hear, whether they speak in words or simply in the determined